absolutely delightful to see you all back again. It was almost impossible that we were ever going to be able to get through a conference without mentioning the C word. And sure enough, now is the time, because as you will know far better than I do, COVID has had an immense impact on you, on your businesses, on the whole sector, and of course on the whole country. And we just thought, with a practical perspective on it, and hopefully a helpful perspective on it, we would spend just a little bit of time discussing that. So would you please welcome up to the podium our speakers, Glyn Pearson from Point of Rental Software, our headline sponsors. And Ryan Pike is Head of Market Development at Trackunit. And Glyn Matthews, Digital Transformation Manager at Sunbelt. And just in case you blinked last time, David Emery, who is a consultant, but is also from the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I think I'll sit here because it's a bit more comfortable and a bit more intimate. Welcome, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I would just like you to spend a couple of seconds introducing yourselves, although David, if you want, you can have a free pass. But equally, if you want, you can remind people about yourself.
Well, thank you. For those of you who nodded off in my first session, I'm Dave Emery, consultant with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I'm sure I don't need to describe again what we do and what we offer. But in case, my colleagues James and Imogen are manning our stand back there.
And you highly recommend a visit?
Indeed.
Of course. Glyn.
Yeah, so I'm Glyn. Hello, everybody. Thank you for staying on for the graveyard shift. I am at Sunbelt Rentals. I've been there for a year. I'm Digital Transformation Manager. Prior to that, I spent 3 years in the IoT world, doing stuff with tracking and managing things and making automated decisions in other industries, so fast cars, fast planes, people, and all sorts of things. Prior to that, I had 20 years in rental, so I've been out, seen other industries, and come back and trying to bring the rental industry into the 21st century.
Oh, well, in that case, you are absolutely the right person to have on the table. I'm trying to bite back the words, Ryan, representing the young people.
Yeah, yeah, the youth. My name's Ryan. I work for a company called Trackunit, so we're almost agnostic in the telematic market. Obviously, JCB has spoken today. We sit, and my role is kind of bringing contractors and renters together and making sense of this million network of data that we've got, and bringing those together to make sense of it.
Well, Glyn, first of all, thank you very much that your company is our headline sponsor. That's greatly appreciated. You're a product manager with Point of Rental. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Glyn. Working with Point of Rental, so we focus on rental management systems, so software to help hire companies and construction companies manage their fleets. Fleet management, and then we complement that with a range of apps which are integrated to the core system. So we have driver apps for delivery, operator apps, workshop app, and we're also now working on the e-commerce side of it, so giving hire companies the ability to have their own branded app that will be integrated to the core system as well.
Thank you all very much indeed. Two very straightforward questions really for all of you, and you can fight over who answers first. It's really from your own perspective or your own business, or David, in your case, from your clients, I would guess. What was the impact of COVID, or what were the main impacts of COVID? And secondly, what have you learned in terms of the impact driving change into the future? David, you start.
Thank you. I am actually now a full-time employee of the Supply Chain School, but prior to that they were a client of mine for around about 7 years. And whereas nowadays, since COVID, we deliver virtually all of our learning virtually, prior to that we used to deliver it in live events, and the school as my client had me deliver workshops and training and seminars all over the UK. And I think we used to deliver something like 300 live events per annum. I well remember 2 years ago meeting my colleague Imogen in Cardiff one day. I travelled from the Midlands where I live to Cardiff. We delivered a live presentation one morning there. That night I went up on the train to Glasgow and spoke in Glasgow for 20 minutes the next day and came home again. So I did the best part of 1,000 miles to deliver 4 hours of material, essentially. And clearly that's not the way we do things now. But when COVID hit us 18 months ago, we in the school got together and tried to predict some scenarios about what did lockdown mean to us. And our directors started to do simulations on what would happen if we lost 20% of our partners. What if people didn't renew? What if people were no longer interested in learning and training? And we worked on a doomsday scenario of up to 40% tail off. And we thought we could survive. But what's actually happened is that by any measure, the engagement with our members and partners has increased hugely, almost exponentially, by teaching through a virtual platform. And the number of partners, even this calendar year, has increased 40%. So in ball terms, we've had a great improvement. I won't hog the limelight, but what I would like to come back to a little bit later, because we, as an organisation, we're not a plant hire organisation, but amongst our members and partners and the people who engage with us, we have clients, contractors, consultants, manufacturers, suppliers. I'd like to come back, if I may, later to draw some conclusions about what their behaviours over that 18 months, and especially in the last 2 or 3 months, might tell us about the industry's appetite to learn and change. But I don't want to hog the limelight.
We'll certainly do that, and we'll also ask, because your training is supporting the construction industry, whether doing so much more, albeit online, has actually had an impact on the qualifications or the standards within the industry. So
come back to that.
Plenty to talk about there. Glyn.
So from a personal perspective, just prior to COVID, I was doing a lot of work in the events sector as well, surprisingly enough. And I remember clearly going to the London Palladium on the 11th of March to provide systems for the Prince's Trust Awards. Funnily enough, Prince Charles did come down with COVID about 7 days after that, but I'm not taking any responsibility. And literally after that, the whole events industry just stopped. So, you know, for the rest of the year, like David, all of these events disappeared. And actually, I had the opportunity to have a few months off as well. So then I ended up joining Sunbelt in the middle of a pandemic. And having been working for a technology company, I guess I was kind of used to using things like Teams and Zoom and things like that. And joining a new organisation in the middle of a pandemic where you don't actually meet any of your colleagues for several months after joining, it's quite an interesting experience. Sunbelt obviously were going through an interesting time as well. They had decided to go for a rebrand just prior to COVID hitting, which, you know, was a brave move to do at any time, but to do it then, it did pull everybody together to say, right, what are we going to do? This has hit. And some very key decisions early on, being able to make decisions quickly, led to a significant investment in building NHS testing centres. And, you know, in the peak, you know, there were well over 500 testing centres, which, you know, it was a completely new market to us. Working with government in pulling these together and building things very quickly in days, as opposed to, you know, where you might have had weeks, months to plan these things ahead. So kind of going from one events industry into a slightly different events industry at a rather critical time, and doing everything virtually was quite a challenge. Digitally, organisations had potentially had a sort of strategy of where they're going, and I'm not saying just Sunbelt, I think right the way across the world, organisations had got their 5-year digital plan, and suddenly they were having to bring those plans to life in months as opposed to years, and I think that was a challenge for anybody, obviously to the delights of people like Zoom and Microsoft who managed to cash in on that market, but also had to invest heavily on building their platforms up at a significant rate. So, I mean, obviously I'm not going to give the full data story now because we'll need to move on to my younger colleague over here. But, you know, one of the things that has become clear is actually how people have had to move quickly, and sometimes how business decisions and business strategies have to change very quickly, and how digital and data can help us to make better decisions and to enable us to change our business model at the flick of a switch.
Do you think it's made us, and by us I mean everyone in this industry, A, more nimble, and B, we realised that perhaps our old systems were much too heavy-footed anyway?
Yes and yes. I think people realised where they hadn't necessarily prioritised investment in systems and data because it's boring and expensive, that suddenly they needed to reap the benefits from it, and they were panicking a little because they hadn't made that investment earlier on. The companies that had were quite easily able to switch to online, and you know, the businesses like Amazon and Google and people like that were doing very well out of it. Thank you very much. So yes, I think it made people sweat on it a bit and panic, but I also think it's done a good thing because it's brought it to the top of people's agendas that their business models might need to change again and quickly. And to do that, you need good information, you need good data, you need to be able to have that information to make decisions, and I'll talk a little bit about IoT in a minute, but to be able to make good decisions and drive your business in a positive way, because the world's changed and it's not going to change back, and it's going to change again. It's necessity drives innovation. We've got the two things going on at the moment. Obviously, we've had COVID and we've got climate change. Those two things will probably drive more innovation in our world, in every industry, than anything else. Forget Brexit, that was just a small thing.
Brian, I'm fascinated to know, and perhaps I'm completely wrong, but you must listen to a lot of what we've discussed today, and when you think about it generally. And perhaps from your youthful perspective, you think, so what's the problem? Why are these people getting so steamed up about all this? And I'm just wondering if, first of all, if I'm right, and secondly, if I am, did COVID have a different impact on your business than it did on everybody else's?
Yeah, so at the time throughout COVID, I was working for a rental company. So I worked with PlantForce, who kind of throughout, like most people in the room, worked. But I think what it did give the industry, me being in it for a short period of time, was time to reflect, and everybody kind of was able to streamline what they were doing. I think it gave everybody almost that focus element. Personally, working from home, I know a lot of people, what they were doing, it changed that way of working. But yeah, I absolutely see that there was massive impact on the industry. I think we'd all done very well to keep going through it and adapt seamlessly to it, which shows great character in the room.
Was it seamless?
I believe so. I believe nobody's seen it as an overwhelming challenge. Every industry that I speak to, most customers or people or clients that I engage with, they say that, hey, the transition to digital was needed, absolutely. And because they recognize that, they transitioned into it very easily.
Very interesting perspective. We'll come back to that as well. And Glyn?
Yeah, obviously there were many, many changes. You know, on the demand side, we had, as somebody mentioned earlier, trying to digitize the whole proof of delivery and the handover of equipment and so on. And because people were trying to have kind of contactless transactions, there was a bigger demand for apps and add-ons. Of course, lots of our customers as well had their people working from home. So there was an increase in demand of people looking for remote access to system and so on and so on. But for me, probably the thing I noticed the most is I think finally the equipment rental industry or the hire industry is starting to consider the whole e-commerce side of the transaction. And that's something I've been an advocate for many years, but the hire industry has resisted it, and there are many reasons that they've resisted it.
Why?
Well, I think there's a fear that, you know, it might commoditize the industry. I think, you know, many hire companies as well feel that maybe their customer base is not ready for it. But I think the whole COVID pandemic proved that actually there is an interest in it. And I actually believe that's a good thing because, you know, I don't want to make any assumptions about anybody's age in the room, but I'm pretty sure even Ryan here didn't have a smartphone or a tablet in his hand when he was 3 years of age. But I read a statistic recently that in excess of 60% of 3-year-olds have their own tablet or smartphone in the UK. And none of us grew up with that. We learned to adapt to it. But very soon there's going to be a whole new generation entering the workforce who grew up with this. And that is what they will expect. They don't want to call people. They don't even want to meet people. And the hire industry has resisted that step of moving into e-commerce. And I think COVID has proven that it can work.
And do you think that resistance has come from the customers or from the companies?
My own personal opinion, more from the hire companies. But on one side, I can understand it. But, you know, the world is changing. And I'm not suggesting that every hire company should put everything online, fire all their salespeople and sit and wait. Absolutely not. But it's about finding a balance between the traditional way of doing things and the new way of doing things. And when the tipping point comes in the industry, the ones that have taken that early adoption and started, they will be ready for it when the tipping point comes, and it will come.
And of course, it's not going to be the new way of doing things forever. We will look back in however many years' time and say, what was the problem? You know, it's like when the telephone was invented. Nobody would seriously think of not using a telephone these days. You know, so eventually it will evolve itself out of being an issue, one would hope, and it will just go on being evolutionary. I'd be interested to know from all of you what differences you're seeing now in terms of how your own businesses operate compared to 18 months ago. Let's start with you, Dave. Or the school,
well,
I should say.
let me describe the changes we made, first of all.
Yeah.
When we realised we'd got to go from, if you like, a live event platform to a digital platform. I think even in the very early days of COVID, if we cast our mind back to some of the Zooms and team calls we were involved with, you would see the etiquette had yet to evolve. People really didn't understand how to look good on screen or behave well on screen. I'm sure we all saw inadvertent shouting and swearing at spouses in the background, silhouettes and so on. And our directors took the view that, you know, the delivery team, if you like, were all experienced public speakers and facilitators, but we needed to be retrained. So it almost seemed to me like on week one, they took that decision to find some experts in digital delivery and have the whole team trained. So despite the fear of falling revenues, they invested heavily in us, the team. And we like to think that we kept our standard to where it was. But there's no denying it's a very different environment. And what I've noticed as a speaker and facilitator is that there is still an issue around the etiquette. So some people will come onto a workshop with me and not have cameras and mics on. If I was to draw a parallel, I would say, well, actually, if I'd met you in a room 2 years ago and you'd come into the workshop, that's like you sitting at the back of the room with a bag on your head. You wouldn't contemplate that, but you will do that in my digital workshop. What was made even worse was I invited a guest speaker to one of my workshops, never met the chap, and when I introduced him, even he refused to put his camera on. So that was a really awkward moment. What we found though, it was almost my theory that if I'd spent 3 hours in a room with you facilitating a workshop, I'm going to ask you at the end to give me a feedback form. My theory has always been that if you're going to shake me in the hand, shake my hand and look me in the eye as you go out, you're not going to be too critical on the feedback form. And my worry was if I ask you to fill in an anonymous feedback form online, you'd suddenly turn into a keyboard warrior, troll type person. And I did have a few concerns over that. But what we've actually found is that the feedback has been even more positive in this digital world than it was in the real world, which has come as a surprise. However, I think in the very recent past, we've reached a little bit of a tipping point. So whilst all our statistics say that more people are attending workshops and webinars with us, more people are self-teaching on our website or using our resources, there's a sense, I think, that people are now going back to normal. And that whereas they had the time and opportunity with home working to spend more time in a training environment, I think real life is possibly taking over again. And I say this because across the entire school and across all the other organisations with which we work, what we're noticing very recently is a very severe drop-off in what we call it a drop-off rate. So if 100 people book to come onto a workshop with you or attend a webinar, typically in a digital world, 50% of them might drop off. But that proportion of those dropping off is increasing. And it's not just us, it's across the board as far as we can see. And we do wonder whether this is because people are now back in their office, back under pressure. And our greatest fear is that if you're now watching a webinar from us or someone else in your office, is that seen as, in inverted commas, proper work? Or is that a little bit of a skive when all your colleagues are running around behind you? So I don't think we've finished understanding the changes. We're still in a phase of great change from our point of view.
Do you think it'll end up as, from your perspective, as a sort of mix and match, that when it suits people to have something in the real world, they will, and when it suits them
I think
to
it
go
is.
online, they will?
I've actually done a proposal for one of our tier 1 partners recently, and they've actually requested that I deliver it in person in London. So yes, I think there's an appetite to get back to this sort of live event.
Glyn, how have your operations changed?
Yeah, I think it obviously everything went online, and as David says, I have a great frustration to people who have their cameras off as well. You know, when I first joined Sunbelt, because I'd been used to doing video calls, being in the IoT world, it was quite common. Yeah. I think when I first joined Sunbelt, I was the only one with my camera on, and it took a while for people to kind of think, well, he's got his camera on, maybe I can turn mine on as well. And you know, I'd like to say now that every call I'm on, 99% of people have their cameras on, which I think is, you know, you get that more complete picture of what's going on. I think, you know, in this industry prior to COVID, when people said they were working from home, I think people thought, you mean they're having a skive or they're waiting for something to happen? I think it actually proved that the world didn't stop. You know, as Ryan said, you know, some companies didn't really have much of a difference. They just carried on as they were. So I think, you know, people have realised, well, actually, you know, you can trust your people to work from home, and yeah, they might go and take the kids to school, or they might mow the lawn at lunchtime, but, you know, they're still getting the jobs done. And actually, they're much more relaxed about it because, you know, they're actually not having to travel 2 hours to get into the office or to get a train to London or whatever. So I think, you know, people have found that it's improved their personal well-being too. From a business perspective, I think decisions probably happen slower.
Or why?
Sorry?
Or why?
I think it was, when you're workshopping things, I think it's more difficult because when you're round tabling things, and you know, I'm one of these people, I love to run, you know, normally I don't sit on a chair on a stage, I'm walking around and I'm writing on things, and I'm sticking things on walls and writing on whiteboards and things like that. And you kind of lose that ability to be able to interact as well. I'm not saying you can't do it, because you can do it with 2 screens and this, that, and the other. But I think that the interaction died off a little bit, and I think we're certainly getting back to what I would say is a hybrid model, and I think that will stay. I think there is a time when it's great to be able to jump on calls in different places in the country from your own desk at home, so you can get more done. I don't know about anybody else here, but I probably had less cups of tea and less toilet breaks all the while that I was doing everything on Teams, because everybody books your meeting 9 till 10, 10 till 11, 11 till 12, 12 till 1. And actually, sometimes you actually have to put something in your diary just to stop people doing it. And then, of course, when one meeting overruns, the next one you're late to, whereas perhaps when you're in the office, people can kind of see how busy you are doing things, so things are different. So yeah, I think a hybrid approach is, I think most employers appreciate that, and I think most of the people who work for companies where they can, I think it's appreciated by the people doing the work.
Did COVID drive any digital change that wasn't just online, offline related?
So for us, we've just started investing in a massive digital program globally, significant systems and data improvement. So one of the things that obviously you challenge yourself with when you start thinking, well, customers want to be able to interact with you through their own systems now. They want to interact with you online. They don't necessarily want to be ringing you up, and they certainly can't walk into your counters and things.
Yeah.
So building that whole new digital platform for the 21st century and beyond, and having that integration, and I'm sure Glyn will tell you all about the wonderful things that these guys are doing in that area. It's certainly an investment we're making, but I think also the industry is starting to look at data as well. I know we've heard from various people talking about telematics and things today, but data in general is pretty ropey in the industry as a whole. Some places have got it better than others, and some some businesses do it better, some divisions in businesses do it better. I think the fact that in the industry we all call the same thing something different. There's no global standards of what we call things. You go into retail and you buy a tin of Heinz beans and it's the same thing wherever you buy it. It uses a global standard. That doesn't exist in our industry yet. I think it will get there. So I think getting good data will help all these systems, and I think to use that word collaboration again that we were talking about earlier, and the telemetry systems that are coming in to save people going to site to, traditionally somebody'd ring up and say, my digger's stopped working. Well, now, we've got the information coming in to say, actually, we'll tell you that your digger's got a problem before it stops working. And bringing it back to the IoT piece, which I don't think we've really touched on much today, is actually making better decisions. So things talking to things. IoT is basically things talking to things and automatically making decisions. So telematics is great because it tells us stuff, but unless somebody actually looks at that and makes a decision, it doesn't give us the benefit necessarily. Whereas hopefully, as we move forward, and certainly the way we're looking forward is that, if my machine tells me there's water in the diesel, hopefully my systems will automatically schedule an engineer to go out and repair that machine or sort that out prior to the machine actually breaking down. Well, and then that phone call stops and we don't have all the unnecessary visits to site.
Brian, you're the telematics king on the panel. I imagine you might take issue with one or two of those points?
No, not at all. I welcome it all.
Excellent.
Being from the Xbox generation, I see the value in connectivity and talking to my friends on a headset, for instance, rather than that.
I just wondered if you're offended by the thought that, you know, there was no standardisation and that things weren't as far advanced.
Yeah, so I think we've got the best opportunity, especially since I've been in it, with HS2 being built, with all eyes being on that construction project, and they've got a great opportunity with the network to mandate or to set standards, especially linking in with ISO and with CPA and engaging with those bodies. So I think over the next 10 years, I think we'll see a massive change in terms of data being a primary focus on these sites. Tenders are now from contractors are being kind of prioritized for what they can deliver, what machines can deliver. And when we talk about collaboration in terms of, I don't think one body, one company, one contractor, one rental company achieves it. I'm fortunate enough to be working on a project that Steve Bradbury mentioned earlier with regards to connectivity and validation. But it's not just two companies. I think we're lucky enough to have Flannery, Lynch, Langer Rourke, Murphy, Explore, all of us working together with that focus. So I think that it's now been brought to the forefront of it, and I think that only good can come from that. But I would say that we need to maybe kind of pull on that HS2 cord a little bit and push them to kind of mandate these things.
Glenn, how is your company operating differently, either digitally or otherwise?
Yeah, I think, you know, at the end of the day, business is all about people, and that starts with your team, your staff, and everybody is different, you know. And I think during COVID, it allowed people to establish or prove, you know, that they can work effectively from home. And I think as we come out of COVID now, I think most companies realize that, yes, that can work, and it will now allow employees to kind of make the choice, you know, do I want to work from home? Do I want to be, am I the people person that wants to be in the office all the time, or do I want to mix it up a little bit? So I think that will be a positive outcome of the pandemic. In terms of how we work, you know, I personally feel that having online meetings is much more efficient than having a group of people in a meeting room, because the online meetings, you know, to echo what Glyn said, like your calendar's full up, so they start on time and they finish on time. And people are conscious that they only have a certain time window to get the meeting over and done with. And I think the other thing for us that we probably realized as a company is that it allowed us to source talent from a wider geographical area. So on our team, you know, on any call, any day, there can be people 4 or 5 countries. So we've recruited a lot of people in the last 1-2 years, and we're not now restricting ourselves to recruit within a certain radius of an office. So that's probably another positive that has come out of it.
As we slowly coast towards an end, you said, David, earlier on that there was something you very much wanted to discuss, and I very carefully wrote it down, and my writing is so appalling that I cannot begin to tell you what it was that you said. Can you remember?
Yeah, it was this concern about maybe the behavioural change in our audience. So whereas there seemed a lot of enthusiasm and appetite to learn for 15 of the last 18 months, my slight concern is that appetite appears to be waning. I personally believe that the only way we can succeed as individuals and as an industry is continuously to improve ourselves and to learn and to challenge ourselves. And I hope that COVID hasn't brought about a peak in interest in learning that is now waning. I hope we can recognise that the future depends on us improving ourselves constantly. So that was my main concern. But if I put a slightly positive spin on something else that we've discovered, you know, at the end of the day, we are a training organisation, and 2 years ago, we needed to travel around the UK to deliver what we had. What we're finding now is that something like 16% of our website hits are not only from other countries, but often from other continents. So we're beginning to think our reach could broaden significantly. And indeed, we've had approaches from elsewhere in the world. Let me just say no more than that. So in one sense, this whole change in the business structure has opened up new markets and opportunities potentially.
I'd be interested in winding up by asking all of you, really, compared to so-called normal times, how fast do you think the pandemic for you or for the industry, whichever you prefer, speeded up the pace of digitalisation change? Glenn, let's start with you at the end.
You know, as a tech company, I'm not sure it actually speeded up our development, because suddenly our customers were asking so many more things that they never asked about before.
So it changed them rather than
Yeah,
you.
so we had to start thinking about, okay, if we develop this or that, how do we make it work with everything else? And you know, so we expanded our team a lot. We have lots of product teams now working on different products, but a key thing for us is making sure all those products can communicate with each other. And so we had to put a lot of time into figuring that out.
And Ryan, in the telematics world, did things speed up, or were they getting exponentially faster anyway?
It was anyway, with the attention on it, but I would say the one good thing that we did, we collect data from all over the world, so we were able to provide something called a downtime index, which showed what machines was active in what parts of the country during COVID and what parts of the world. So it was fascinating to see what countries were picking back up or slowing down. I think for us, in the conversations we had throughout that with governments and major contractors, it was a case of the highlight was then on data. So it's sped up that conversation, and people already were going into the conversation knowing exactly what it was and had an idea of what they wanted to achieve from it. So from our perspective, it helped us massively because we were already there.
Excellent. Glyn?
Yeah, I mean, it highlighted where investment needed to be made, and it certainly accelerated, you know, globally with our colleagues in America as well. You know, decisions were made quite quickly on you know, investing in new technologies, and even on basic, you know, there was basic stuff early on that was investment was needed quickly. But I think, you know, strategy-wise, it's definitely brought it forward, and you know, we have some pretty ambitious things to do in the next 3 years, of which I'm probably going to sweat a lot.
I hardly speak at the thought. Thank you very much indeed. Dave, do you want to finish off with that thought?
I think I've been fortunate enough to work as clients with some tier 1 construction companies and with local authorities, and what's really alarmed me behind the scenes is how aged their hardware and software has been, and how constrictive it's been on the business. So I imagine if COVID has done nothing else, it will have forced those organisations into upgrading their technology. My slightly tongue-in-cheek thought about this is that COVID is not the greatest enabler of digital change in the last 10 years. And I was told a story a few years ago by a guy who'd invented an app for use on construction sites, and it was effectively a digital diary, an on-site digital diary where you could do snagging lists and so on using your phone. And he said to me the biggest change in attitude towards technology on construction sites came when they launched the Betfred app. Once a site operative could place his bets on a piece of digital technology on a construction site, that opened up the market. So slightly tongue-in-cheek, but that's my response.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, on that high note, I won't even ask if you've ever used the app yourself. Let's just see if anybody has any questions arising from any of those extremely interesting discussion points. Thank you, speakers, very much. Any thoughts, questions, comments? Chris?
Hi, Glenn, you mentioned the e-commerce, you brought up e-commerce, and we're not quite sure if our customer base, with especially operated plant and large operated plant, is anywhere near ready for that. It potentially could be on self-drive and smaller equipment, but what are you guys doing as a, like I say, a software company that offers that? How are you trying to promote that if you really quite passionately feel it's gonna be the future?
So we will be launching a product that will allow hire companies to have their own branded app, which will be fully integrated into their rental management solution. So let's say Syrinx in the UK, and they will be able to configure that app in different ways to suit different customers, different product types, and so on. But basically, through the app, the customers will be able to request machines. If they have price agreements, they will be enabled. The customers will be able to request off-hires, will be able to report breakdowns, attach pictures of the machines, and showing what's broken or damaged on the machine. So that kind of functionality, but it will also work as a customer portal. So the customers will be able to actually see what equipment they have on hire, pull down documents, and so on.
Is that helpful, Chris? Any other questions? I was about to say it's your last chance. That's not strictly true because you can collar our speakers afterwards, but effectively it's your last chance. Seems a shame to waste the opportunity. Oh,
Hello?
Lovely, I can see a hand over there.
Yes, my name's Paul Lyons. I work for the Construction Equipment Association in a market information role. I have a question for Ryan. You reminded me, you mentioned during COVID, during lockdown, that Trackunit developed that downtime index. And I remember seeing it as a very useful measure of different markets, what level of activity was recovering. Is that index still available? Is
Yes.
it?
Yep, yeah, it's still live.
Are you available to all, or do you have to sort of?
Yeah, so we ended up kind of not wanting to just send data out, and that would scare people. But what we ended up doing is making it that our users can access that, and they have access to that. But obviously, upon request, if anybody needs that information, we're open to conversation with that.
Speakers, thank you very, very much indeed. Can we please show our great appreciation for Glenn Pearson and Ryan Pike and Glyn Matthews